Hello there. So welcome to another stream. Excuse me. Looking at, well, yesterday we were looking at an item for IMVU that used multiple poses, and because of an issue with IMVU and the way it works with working with is this the one? Yeah, that's the static one. Oh, that's the one with the single pose. Number 3. Right, so yesterday we were looking at how to get a furniture item working for IMVU that had multiple poses. And initially, or ideally, the way that we might want to do this is to load several animations, or several poses, I should say, into a single action, and then having IMVU's system randomly select a pose, or they're called ensembles, an ensemble from the ones that are associated with the action. But the problem with that, with Blender exported FBX and Cal3D files, is that the system, when it switches between the poses, it plays the entire sequence, and that entire sequence also includes the reset position that we have to use as Blender users in order to get a pose, a functioning pose or a functional pose out of Blender and into IMVU. Without this, the exporter just exports, well, it does export the pose, but IMVU doesn't recognize anything going on within the pose because all the animation frames, all the frames are the same. So it thinks there's nothing going on, so it ignores all the data. But the problem with this in IMVU is that when IMVU is switching between poses, so when IMVU switches, in the same way that we can select a different pose, let's do that again. So we can select a different pose in Blender and it switches to a different pose. What should happen in IMVU is exactly the same thing that we've just done there. And it just switches automatically to the pose that's selected. But for some reason in IMVU, what it does is, instead of playing the frame range that is set, so we have a frame range set within the action of 1 to 5 frames in this instance, which correspond to this frame range. Let me see. There we go. Whoops, not that one. Let's do that. This highlighted frame range, which is 5 frames. But whenever IMVU switches, it plays the entire sequence, and that includes all the frames. And of course that means that when the pose switches, the reset briefly flashes on screen essentially before it switches to the next pose. And of course that's annoying, for want of a better way of putting it, because we want to avoid that. We want it to just switch the poses, but unfortunately the system that IMVU uses doesn't accommodate our being able to do that as Blender users. This issue doesn't seem to occur with 3D Studio Max. So the only way that we can get around this as Blender users is to set up the item so that it uses multiple poses. or multiple pose or avatar spots. So for each pose, so we had 10 poses in the previous file that was open. For each of those, there is a corresponding seat node or avatar spot set. And to make it usable, we have to place the actual seat node. So that's the catcher picture, that's the picture node, the catcher node, and the seat nodes are all in the same place because the pose uses the same fundamental position of the seat node. But because we can move the handles, we can position them around the object, which makes them selectable when the item is brought into IMVU. So that, where's all the, oh, that's the wrong one. So we have the furniture item, and it has all the handles positioned around the object so that that can be selected, clicked, and each one has a particular pose. So yesterday, after we'd done all of this, we discussed making a racetrack and or adding a second pose that may be animated as opposed to a static pose. So that is what we'll go. That's what we'll do today. We'll create a second pose for the item, which means we have to set up the furniture item itself to accommodate a second avatar on the object, and then we'll use the pose file that we've got. We'll use the pose file to create another, hopefully animated, depends on time, because the animated poses are a little bit more time consuming to get right. But what we'll do is set up the item. So we'll set up the icebike, bumper cart, or whatever it is. We'll get that set up to accommodate another avatar pose, and then we'll create the pose. So first things first, let's get the furniture item set up. So we have to open the Dodgem 4. So before doing anything, just save a version of this so that we don't oversave the one that we know works. So 5. And then what we can do, because the project starts with the furniture starter file, which is this file, we have a seat node set for sitting and a node set for standing. And we've only used the sitting one, so we should have the standing one available, which we can use as the secondary pose spot. So that's what we'll do. Just got to find it. Nope. 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 Yes. Okay, so what we need really is just the root node of the furniture item, the item itself, and the seat nodes for the standing avatar. So moving the group, they're all grouped together, so you just have to select the large node and it'll move the whole group. So all we need to do is just position this where we want it roughly to be. There is fine. Select the catcher and picture node. I'll switch the theme to a lighter color to make this easier to see. There we go. This should be easier to see. So we have the catcher and picture node, and at the moment by default, because they're all grouped together, they're stuck in the middle of the furniture item. So we can move those to one side. And when you do, make sure you're in global. Otherwise they will... Oh, it didn't do it that time. Sometimes when you're in local orientation, they'll move in opposite directions. So switch to global and just move them to one side, and you can rotate and position them as a group. Don't do it individually, because the distance between them is critical for interactive actions where the avatars interact with one another. That'll do. Oh, somebody just... Thank you very much if you are watching. Silver Seraph just subscribed. Thank you very much. Much appreciated. We don't do the don't do all the widgets and the flashy things. Personally, find those a bit of a distraction. But if... Do I... Oh, yes. Yes, Silver. If you just go to catsbits.com, all one... Well, not all one word. Catsbits is all one word. Catsbits.com, and then just click on the tutorials. I'll drop the link in chat. Hang on. Yeah, I can't... Silver Seraphs just said that they find using Blender easier than Maya. I can't speak to that because I've never really tried Maya, but Max, I've tried it with Max, and they're useful obviously for... they cater to different audiences, although fundamentally they can do exactly the same content production. I think mainly the main difference between Blender, Max, Maya and all the other applications is the degree to which there is a professional and reliable support service available for them. So when you buy Max or Maya, you're not buying the application per se, you are buying the support that goes with it. So, you know, you have, relatively speaking, you have access to support that's available more readily than it is for Blender. But in terms of the actual functionality of the applications, I've only used Max, and it you know, it does what you need it to do. It does what it says on the tin, as they say. So where were we? Right, so yes, you can move your catcher and picture to one side, and that'll be fine. Just make sure that the distance between the two is not adjusted. That's not modified. So we've got the handle, and this may be a bit of an issue because we have so many other handles associated with the object already. But what we can do with this is perhaps stack that on top of the one that's already that's the initial pose that can be clicked on when you use the item, but we can move the handle for the secondary pose over the top of that to make it accessible. And that is literally all we need to do for oh, actually no, that's not, that's a fib. What we need to do next is we've got to parent the nodes that we've just manipulated to the root node, and this can be a little tricky because we've got so many nodes all in the same place. That's all these seat nodes. So we want that one. We want that one, and that one. And we need to select the root. Don't know if this will work. Oh yes, it does. Fine. Excellent. And parent these together. So that's Control P for using the shortcuts, or Object, Parent, Object, and keep transform. And then we get the little relationship lines change so that they are now, whereas before the catcher and pitcher were parented or linked together, they are now all linked to the root node. We need to change the names of these because they are numerical. So that's, we've got catcher 10. So this is set or seat 11, even though it's standing instead of sitting. That needs to be renumbered as 11. So to the catcher, pitcher, and the handle. And the reason for that really is to do with the handle, because the handle doesn't have an append like catcher does. So catcher can be a sitting or standing spot. So if you, as we did, we had essentially 2 seat O2s. But that doesn't work for the handles, because you can't have 2 handle nodes named handle O2. They all have to be unique. So if the handle is 11, that basically means in order for IMVU to know which set of nodes it should be using for that handle, they all have to be matched as a set. Right, so double check this. Whoops. Select the root. Yeah, everything moves. Fine, perfect. So save this. So for the next bit, so that's the basics of the item setup. So all we've essentially done is added or included another seat node set with the furniture item. So to make the custom pose for this now, what we can do, open up pose, pose file 7. So this is the pose file that has all the initial poses in, and we'll need this because we can use it. And at the moment, it's got a reference point, which should be, oh, in this instance, it's just dodgem, which is it's possibly for an animation that. But dodgem is in the same place. Actually, this will be easier with a... Right, just make this easier. So the furniture item has been set up so that it sits at 0, 0 or grid center. So all the primary nodes to do with the seating, or the seat nodes, are all located at the center of the grid. And they also, that's also where the root node is. So we have all the, whoops. Make this a little bit easier to see in the outliner. So as I click through, so I'm clicking the same spot because all the seat nodes are in the same location. And it's just toggling through all the different seat nodes that occupy the same space. And even though, where has it gone? So dodgem is the node that's controlling the furniture mesh. So that can be selected and moved independently of the root node. So we can use that essentially as, well, it was used as the root for the poses. And the pose skeleton is rooted or zeroed in on the same location. So female 03 master root. So when you select the bone, you'll see the name of it down at the bottom here. And also in object properties. So this part of it, let me change the color to make that easier to see. This part of it is where the origin point of the whole armature is. So all these bones are connected, well, they're not connected, they're associated with an armature. And that armature as an object is zeroed in on the center of the grid. So we can use the node and its origin, which is also in the center. We can use that as a point of origin for all the elements, that's poses, meshes, seat nodes, everything to do with this particular item and the way that this item is being set up, are all linked or targeted at the origin at the center of the grid. So it's always worth making sure that you set that up when you are creating your items. So female master root is targeted, for want of a better way of putting it, at the origin. And we created the poses based on that point of reference, which means that when the reset pose is done, the avatar stands inside the object. So now that we've created a second pose, what we can do is append that, not pose, a second seat spot. Oh, those tutorials, by the way, Silver, some of those link to the official Creator Education Center, which I've been writing tutorials for. So some of those are CatSpits tutorials. The really long ones are CatSpits tutorials, and the shorter ones, they go to the Creator Education Center. So what do we need? We need dodgem 5. So what we're doing now is appending. Just double check we are appending. Yeah, append. So what we're doing now is appending. Where is it? 5. And when you use append, it basically treats the file as a zip archive. We want objects. And we want seat 11 standing. And that's essentially all we need. Where's root? Bring that in as well, just in case. Append. So we've now got the 2 nodes that we've just brought in. Just put that on a different layer. So you can either press the M key, M for Marty, and it'll bring up the layers dialog. Oh, we have to be careful with that because we're in pose mode. That's better. That just switches them to a different layer so that we don't get confused with other elements of the project. Right, so that is our it's not the pose spot, that's going to be, we have to make an adjustment to the pose file. Now let me think how to do this. So what we need to do, seat 11.standing, that now needs to be centered on the grid. So this origin point now needs to be moved to grid center. Because what we're essentially trying to do here is align the origin point of female 03 master root with the origin point of the seat node, so that when the 2 are put together and assembled in IMVU, when the user clicks on that handle spot, the avatar appears in the correct place, because the seat node is actually the target, the thing that the pose locks onto. So let me just, so what we can do here before we do any of that sort of stuff is just save the file, save as, so we have another version, 8. And select everything. Front, oh, side view. And using the translate widget, what we can do also is change the pivot point to the active element, and that'll switch to the last object that was selected, which will be the seat node, or should be the seat node. So just move that so that it sits approximately on the grid center. Like that. And then what we want to do next is now let me think. Let's see if this will work. So that's those are the old poses. So we need another skeleton and avatar. So what we can do here is select them duplicate move those to another layer, because the skeleton that we actually need to use is the one that we, not the one we just duplicated in the sense of the copy, but the original, because that's the one that's used to create the actual pose. And that can be moved so that the origin point is at 0, 0. So that then means that we have two skeletons and they both use the same action or the same pose. But, and this is how you make couples poses actually as well. So this is a couples pose project, if you like, but it's not a couples pose in the way that it's traditionally thought of if you're using 3D Studio Max, because essentially all a couples pose is that you have essentially a left and a right version of the avatar, and you give each version of that a different pose, and that's essentially all we're doing here. So we've duplicated the original pose so that we have that duplicate as a reference for one of the poses, because what we can do, whoops, where did that go? Is that reset? That's reset. That's weird. Because it shouldn't. It should stay in the same place. Because the pose data is only associated with the let's keep that unique but call it 9B. That's very odd. So what happens if we change the pose for that one? That's 9, so let's change that to a different. Right, so you can kind of see what we're actually going to do. So that's a bit awkward. So do we have to create a second set of poses? Otherwise it's going to reset the position of the avatar. Okay, so that's all right. That's all right. So what's the first one done? Oh, there we go. I'm not quite sure what went on there before. My voice is... Oh, that's unfortunate. Well, Mick, no one is forcing you to listen, so it's up to you. So what we're going to do now is create a new pose bumper 11. So what have we got? We've got 9, 10, 9B, right, 11. So we need to create a new pose. So click the plus. That'll make that unique. And then 11. And then what we can do from here is reset that. And then create the pose. We need to reset each keyframe. Whoops. Right, so, and this is where, so what we want is for the character to be leaning forward, pushing on the back of the seated character. So move the arms first to see how far away we are. So that's selecting the shoulder bone. Moving that so on either side so that we can see how far we have to go. Whoops. And just disable X-ray for this to make it easier to see what's going on. Right, so we're some distance away. So we've got two ways of doing this. We can either rotate the pelvis bone, which is the one that's sticking out the back, or we can manipulate the back bones. And then of course adjust the shoulder. So all you're essentially doing at this point is just blocking out or roughing out the position, approximately the approximate positions of the bones, so that you can see more or less where you are, to then adjust the pose to fit. So we need to adjust the wrists. Because what we'll do is bend the character at the waist, so we can't, we can't really bend the spine too much. So use the pelvis and the spine bones to create the pose. But if you move the pelvis, you also then have to adjust the thigh bones to straighten the legs back out. So what we want with this is one leg on the back of the bike, like so. And then we'll have the other leg. Well, that'll eventually skip, I guess. So what we'll do now is adjust the shoulder bone. So the shoulder bone is this tiny little one, and whenever you need to move the arm for it to do something, move the shoulder bone, this bone, instead of this bigger bone, because this one is the bicep, and that rotates. It only rotates, or you should only really use it on a single axis, because it's the twist of your arm, whereas the shoulder is the one that does all the rotation, the full rotation of your arm, which is your ball joint. So what we're doing is positioning the hands so that they're on the back. Don't necessarily have to be symmetrical with this either. Whoops, that's the wrong bone. That's the wrist bone. Want the elbow. And then adjust the head. So these are the neck bones. These are these tiny bones that are often hidden inside the clavicle. What we want is the head looking more or less ahead. And that is the basic pose. So what we can do now is save that file. Save as 9. We need to copy this, so select all the bones. Move the frame slider to frame 5. Insert. Oh, hang on, did we do that right? So copy. So that's these 3 icons. So we've got copy, paste, and then there's another one which you don't really need to use. Copy and paste. Oops. There we go. And then make sure that the reset, so that's Alt R and Alt G, or pose, clear transform, and then all. So we can check this. Save. We can check this by exporting. So we file, export, FBX. And we want to now this should be interesting. Yeah, this should be interesting because we've now got 2 skeletons and two two sets of meshes, but we actually only need the action that's associated with the selected armature. But in order to get Blender to export everything properly, File, Export, FBX, make sure that selected objects this property or setting, make sure that's deselected or deactivated. Geometry, we don't need any of that. Armature, don't need those. Animation, deselect NLA strips and force start and end keying. And what this does is it forces Blender to export all the animations that are included in the project as separate tracks. And that's it, export. Uh-oh. Oh no, it did work. Okay, I was going to thought might crash. So we need to export the updated whoops, that's not the updated one. Which one's the updated one? Oh, there we go. So we need to export this now. So select everything aside from the avatar helpers. Just click a node so that one is active, and then export that to FBX. And in this case we want selected objects. So click geometry, disable the modifiers. For normal furniture items or for normal rooms or accessories, you can keep apply modifiers active, and that'll ensure that any smoothing or modifiers that are assigned to the mesh are applied on export. Armatures, add leaf bones, always disable that. Animations, we don't have to worry about that too much. And then export. And that's done that. So let's assemble in IMVU. So derive new product, furniture, go. So this is the default furniture item. Import, load FBX. We want to load in the dodgem first. So because it's a furniture item, we don't get the select or set skeletal root selection box. We'll get that next with the next file. So scale 0.01, deselect rename room nodes, change the mesh ID to 0, and then everything else is okay. Import. Apply changes, and there is the furniture item. So it's now included the one that we used before, so just close that. Whoops, close one too many. So the one we used before, or set up before, only has the nodes circling around the furniture item, but the one that we've just brought in now has this additional spot at the top there. which corresponds to the standing pose that we created or added earlier. So now we need to load in the second file, which is the one that contains all the poses. So that's 9. Right, so because we've got 2 skeletons and 2 sets of meshes associated with the skeletons, IMVU, well, not IMVU, the FBX has included those in the file. So now IMVU is giving us an option to select the skeleton that we need to use. So the duplicate, the one that we were using that kept the, so that's this one on the left, this one. So that's the duplicate, and that has been appended. Let me check. As an object or set. Oh. Oh, that fixed it. As a set of objects, they've been appended a numerical number that will make them unique. And IMVU's picked up on that. So it's giving us 2 sets of skeletons, the duplicate being .001. We don't want that. What we want is the second one, 86 bones. For skeletons, it's always 86 bones, even though it gives us an option for 88. So click that, and we'll get a list of the meshes that are associated with it, which is fine. Configure FBX. And then it'll bring in all this stuff. And what we want is number 11. So there's number 11. So disable the meshes. We don't need those. Disable the materials. We don't need those. Just going to deselect 2 of these because we don't need those either. So what we've got is a list of all the active actions that have been included with the FBX file, and 11, this one at the top, is the one that we just created, and we want all of those in the file. So apply scale, make sure that's 0.01. We don't have to mess around with any of this stuff, and then import. Blah de blah de blah. Import changes, and then apply changes. And because we've brought in another skeleton, we have to reset the project so that it's using the furniture skeleton instead of the one that it's just brought in, and that'll bring our furniture nodes back into place. Not furniture nodes, seat nodes. So now actions, add, and we want stance dot, oh hang on, did we create that, the seat node, that needs to be named Dodgem because it's a custom pose. Yep, C11 dot Dodgem 11. So re-export that, save the file, select everything, deselect the avatar meshes, select a node, and then export again. FBX, that's fine, that's okay. Selected objects, that's alright. Export. So we have to re-import the file. FBX import, load FBX. Dodgem 5, 0.01, 0, mesh, that's okay. Import. Now that was important because we need to reference, in order to link the pose, the custom pose that we created with that specific seat node, seat nodes have to be named uniquely, and the name should not be sitting or standing. So that seat node was called stance, no, it was called seat11.dodgem11, but in order to associate the pose with it, we call the trigger for that, if we want this to play automatically when the seat node is used, stance.dodgem11. Avatar, same ensemble, and then in skeletal animations we can select number 11, set that to loop infinitely, frame range, frame 1 start, frame 5 end, then replace, and that should give us our custom pose. So there we are, our custom pose. So I'll set stance dot dodgem 01, I think. Avatar, same ensemble. That's 1. Replace 0. Same frame range, so 1 to 5. We need an actor. Add an actor. So we've got our actor. That actor oh, there we go. Oh, we need to switch the pose because it was pose 2. Oh, that's not going to work now. Close that. That's the problem with the editor. If you make a change to the object and you've got an actor in the scene, you have to delete the actor and then reload it so that IMVU recaches the file correctly to include whatever changes you've made. Oh, well, let's go with that and see if that works. Whoops. Where's the spot gone? Dagnabbit, didn't I change the wrong one? Bumper 2. Change the wrong one, get rid of that. Do that again. And that's the other thing with the actor that's loaded is relative to the active tab that's open. So let's try that again. Dagnabbit. Let's see if that works. Oh, there we go. So there we have essentially a couples pose. And that's just a static pose. If you wanted that to be animated, you would then create a longer animation here in Blender. So instead of it being a static pose, it would be animated for however long that whatever the animation would be, and you would just go through the same process again. You would export that and it would just be a longer animation, and it would be set up the same way in IMVU, and that gives you your couples pose. So I'm going to make a bit of an adjustment to the arm there because it's missing its target. So it looks okay in Blender, but in IMVU it's offset slightly, so have to compensate for that. So shoulder bone, and just bring that in a little bit. And it needs to be raised, so we need to adjust the character's arm so that it swings in and swings upwards a little bit, so that we close this gap where the shoulder is. So what we're doing there is just selecting the shoulder bone, making an adjustment to the rotation, and then the elbow, making an adjustment to that as well. So because we've made those adjustments, select all the bones again, make sure one is active, so that's just right click it to make it go pale blue on the outline. Copy, paste, so that all the frames are the same. Don't have to worry about the reset. Save, and then re-export. Deselect, deselect, deselect. NLA strips, force start end, okay. And then re-import that changed file back in. So that's number 9. Again, it's going to give us the options for both skeletons. We need to select the one that isn't appended with this number, and we want 86 bones. Configure, deselect, deselect, just get rid of these which are not needed. So it brought in 11 again. It'll bring all of, well, we can either bring all of them in or just the one that we actually want, which is number 11. So again, apply scale 0.01 and then import. OK, apply changes, and that should, oh, we have to reset, because again, every time you re-import a source file, an FBX file, and it includes a skeleton, IMVU automatically uses the new skeleton of the file that's just been brought in. So you always have to go back to the config tab and reset to the actual furniture file that you were originally set up as the skeleton for the furniture item. So apply that, and that gives us back our and that should now, and there we have the adjustments compensated for, so that now works. And that is a couples pose, essentially. So all you would need to do now is save the file and then upload. This is version. So that's saving the file and then just upload. But before you do that, because we've been importing lots of files, depending on how many of these spots are active, you'll need to make sure that you remove any redundant assets that are imported into the project before you export. So get rid of these, save the file again, and then upload. So we need to now set up all of these poses. Dodgem 01, so that's 01. O2. Three. So there are 10 of these. Stance dot dodgem 04. So what have we got? Oh, missed out 03. Dodgem stance dot dodgem 3. Oh, hi Mayaka. No worries. Not doing the racetrack today. We're just doing a cooperative pose, essentially. I'll put that on screen in a sec. That's number 3. Done 4, so we want 5. No, the racetrack. The racetrack will be for another day. I thought it would be interesting just to do because we talked about it yesterday, doing a cooperative, well, not a cooperative pose as such, but doing a second pose, adding a second pose to the icebike. So that's what we've done today. Just created a pose. But I will do dodgem 06. I will do an animated one off screen and then just go over the process of making an animated one, because, as you know, animated avatar poses do take quite a while to do. Seven. 8. Yes, they are very easy. Yes, just takes a few minutes. But we did have a critic earlier that probably is one of those that would appreciate that sentiment of things being done quickly. Why isn't it done yet? And then 10. So what this should do, no, not live. As far as I'm aware, the only way, so Miyaka's asking if there's a way to show older comments in a stream. Not when it's live, no, you have to, well, at least I don't think you can. I mean, obviously you can with YouTube, obviously, because it keeps the history live. But with Twitch, I think you have to go back to the archive once it's done. They're visible in the archive, so the chap that voiced his opinion, and I shall leave it as that, the chap that voiced his opinion is permanently on record now, so everyone will know who he is, assuming it's a he. I'm guessing it's a he because of what was said, but everyone can see them now forever and eternity, so long as Twitch is live. So take that as a note or a warning for all of those Muppets out there, that your comments do remain live, and you will be exposing yourselves as being the Muppets that you are. So it's always worth, well, as your grandma should have said, if you've got nothing nice to say, say nothing. Ah, no. That's why the videos are archived. The archives don't expire as far as I'm aware. So the live videos do after, is it 6 days, 14 days, however long it is. The live videos do. But because all of these are educational, because we're all just going over the process of making things and fixing things, I make a point of highlighting and archiving the videos. And when you watch the videos back on Twitch, the comments are live with the video. So everyone will be able to see the particular individual that was expressing their, air quotes, opinion. So we need to set these all as replace, otherwise, whoops, what's that one? 7. So we use replace to make sure that when IMVU triggers a new pose or a new animation, it doesn't do any weird stuff as it transitions from one pose to another. It would be nice if there were an easier way to do this. Right, so now we have to go back through all of those and set the loops, 0, and the frames, 1 to 5, 0, whoops, 0, 1 to 5. So of course this is the tedious bit if you've got lots of poses in your project. And you have to keep clicking the Apply Changes button, otherwise it'll sometimes not keep the changes that you've added to your properties. So you could go back to something that you thought was set and the information will be lost. Another oversight with the Create tools. Right, so save this, save. So, for your benefit, Miyaka, we created a couples pose, or essentially a couples pose. So we duplicated the skeleton. We kept the original as the posable skeleton. But because of the way that this will do the same thing in Max, I guess, you can associate an animation with different. It's the same armature, but they both use different action sequences, and that allows us an easy way to set up cooperative or couples poses. They're not really cooperative poses, I guess, but couples poses. So all we need to do is just add a pose spot to accommodate the second pose, stick the handle somewhere where it's visible, export that huge file with lots of nodes in it, export the pose file, and then just auto assemble them, and we have our couples pose. I'm not sure how you would do if you wanted, for example, if you wanted a secondary pose for each of the primary poses. Why is it not letting me do that? There we go. So if there were to be a secondary pose for each of the primary poses, that would mean that your furniture item would have loads of seat handles. So you have to have a seat handle for every pose that's associated with each avatar. Wow, that would make your furniture items crazy. Seat 1, that's seat 11. Seat 1, seat 1. Seat 2, seat 2. So that's, what pose is that? That's seat 2. Is matched with seat 11. So if you wanted a second set of poses to match each of the first set of poses, that basically means that you have a second set of seat handles. So with this having 10 primary, that basically means that you end up with 20 seat handles, which means that the object is getting unwieldy to use. So you'd have to decide how many poses that you want. If your item is going to be used by multiple avatars, you need to think about how many poses you want the furniture item to have, because otherwise it means that you are overloading the furniture item with seat handles, which means that it's going to be very difficult for people to use in IMVU. So you'd have to reduce the number. So instead of having, so you'd have 10 and split those between the two avatars. But that is couples poses, or, well, yeah, couples poses, or two poses that can be set up as a couples pose. I mean, essentially it is quite straightforward, but there's quite a bit of fiddling and forethought that has to go into the items, depending on how you want the avatars to use the furniture items. So if it's just a single, if it's just an item that a single avatar can use, it's not necessarily an issue, because you can overload the item with a fair number of seat handles that make the item interesting for the user to select the different poses that are available. But as soon as you add a second avatar to this, you're going to have to reduce the number of primary poses there are, because, yeah, otherwise it just basically means that you're overloading the item with too many seat handles. And as we all know, when you start, when there are a lot of these things in a room, or a lot of furniture items in a room, the handles get very difficult to select. So there we have cooperative poses. So for the next stream, I'll take a look at, I'll probably do this offline because they do take quite a while to do. I'll create an animated secondary pose that we can link to this. So we have this static pose, and then there'll be an animated one, and it'll be set up in a similar way. And we'll eventually get round to a race track, or a track of some sort, that these dodgems, these ice dodgems, can race around on. Yeah, racetrack. Yeah, you just want a racetrack. We'll have to do some testing on that, because as we mentioned, as we discussed yesterday, if you load a furniture item with a furniture node into a furniture room, it can cause issues. So I have to test that. Because that would be quite, as we said yesterday, that would be quite fun if people could make their own racetracks. I mean, all you need is a flat plane, or whatever shape the racetrack is going to be, and people can make their own tracks, or the same tracks, but they animate at different speeds. I was thinking about that actually, because you could possibly turn it into a little game. So if you had a racetrack, and there's your start and there's your end. At the moment, in IMVU, basically it's just you click and the thing does what it's animated to do. So it'll just race from start to end based on the animation that the creator adds to the sequence. So I was wondering if I'm still trying to wrap my head around this, but to create a degree of interaction, what you could do is set some checkpoints. And the idea of the race would be who can click through each of the checkpoints the fastest. But in order to avoid people cheating, so because you could start and then, you know, whoever's in the chat room officiating the race could say go, and everyone would just click the end one, and it would be whoever, you know, clicks to the end would win. But I'm wondering if there's a way to use, because this is a furniture item, I'm wondering if there's a way to use morph animations or node. So this would be a furniture node. I'm wondering if there's a way to set morph animations to trigger a morph that activates. So if you click on the first checkpoint, clicking on that checkpoint activates a morph which displays the second checkpoint. None of these are visible. So the node, I'm not quite sure how you would do this with nodes, because we can't hide. I don't think we can hide nodes. So basically you're using morphs and animation to control the checkpoints as they appear, and they only appear once the preceding checkpoint has been clicked on, because they don't activate otherwise. So they're not visible unless the checkpoint is clicked. So you click the first one, oh, so you mean stack the nodes like that? So each one of these is a node. Is there a way? There isn't a way to show hide nodes, is there? Not above, but all in the same exact place. So what? How would that work? The nodes appear based on an animation. So Miyake is saying, so when one node is clicked, that node is occupied. Yes. Node 2 will be available for someone else. Yeah. All right. Yes, that's right. So would you set up your racetrack? So your racetrack would have a number of different lanes then, wouldn't it? So if the racetrack has a number of lanes and each lane is set up exactly the same, so we've got our lanes, lane 1, lane 2, lane 3, lane 4. That's the start, and each one of these is a node or a spot that has to be clicked in succession in order for the race to be had. So if you are all at this first spot, that spot is occupied. So in order to stop people from cheating, you'd want to be able to hide or essentially disable all of this lot so that you could only click second set, which would then hide or show this next set, and so on. There's got to be a way of doing it. Right, right. Yeah, so we can animate the nodes. So Miyake's saying the nodes don't have to remain within the user's view, so they can be positioned way off screen. So that might be a bit like what are they? They're teleporters. The way that teleporters work. Right, so you'd have an animation that had all the nodes, and the unused ones would be hidden way off screen somewhere, but the handles would be visible so that they could be clicked, which brings the furniture node back into place so that the furniture item can advance. to the next spot. Interesting. It's a shame we can't just show, hide nodes, because that would make this so much easier. But I reckon that you could, with a bit of tweaking, you could get this to work. Or I wonder if, instead of hiding them off screen, so you don't want someone to cheat and advance to the end by clicking the end node. So what if the animation for the path has all the nodes at the start point? So if they tried to cheat, it would be obvious that they were cheating, because they would always go back to the same start point. So instead of having the nodes off screen somewhere, you would be essentially doing a similar thing in terms of they're not usable for the racetrack, because all you're doing is basically, instead of having them off screen, you're essentially making them unusable, because they're all at the start point. So you wouldn't necessarily need to have them off screen. That might work as an alternative, because the danger is that if they are off screen, that someone just rotates the view, just happens to rotate the view and find the nodes way off in the distance, and click the nodes, and voila, they've won. So if you have all the nodes using, so basically it's the same principle, but they're just at the start point instead of being off screen. That would work. And then you would just, so spot 2 would be available from the get-go, but the rest of them would be animated so that they are first node, but they become available when you click on the second node. That could be quite a tricky animation to set up. Have to think about that. Because that would, if it's doable, if that were doable, it would add a level of interaction to IMVU that's just not been possible before, or that's not really been introduced to the program. Oh yeah, definitely worth it. Definitely worth it. Because it's I mean, that's as you know, being a long-time user, one of the things, or one of the criticisms of IMVU is that it doesn't have any games. There are no games within IMVU other than that walk-off thing, which I don't know if anyone uses anymore. But this kind of thing could introduce a whole different level of interaction with between, users of IMVU. Yeah, so Easter egg hunt, exactly. So as Miyaka's saying, you could, if it works, the principle then could be used for all sorts of things. So she is suggesting an Easter egg hunt, or any sort of hunt or race where you want to have incremental discovery of something, or incremental an incremental pathway. I think we're onto something here. Have to knock heads together and have a think about this, because this would be quite fun. So each of the furniture nodes don't appear unless the previous one is occupied. Yeah, interesting. We'll have to do some experiments. Right, well, on that note, we'll call it quits here, because we've done what we set out to do. Yeah, not knock each other out. Yes, exactly. So that was cooperative poses. So for Blender users, that basically means, just to summarize, so cooperative poses, you're basically duplicating the starter file so that you have two versions of the pose, and depending on which pose is the active one that you're messing around with, that should always be positioned at the center of the grid, and then you pose that skeleton relative to the other pose that you've duplicated as your reference object, or your reference pose, animation, whatever it is that you're doing. But that does mean that you might have to then offset your furniture item, depending on what it is, so that the seat node is always at the same grid center. And then once you've got that set up, you can use your primary pose as your reference, and then your secondary pose, which becomes your primary pose in the project file, as the one that you match up to your primary. And then once you've got that, just export the entire project and then filter out the details. So filter out the details in the skeletal, where's the file gone? Dodgem 9s. So filter out, because again it'll duplicate, it'll notice that there is a duplication. So ignore the ones that have 0, 0, 1 or whatever the number is, just ignore that. You always want the one with 86 bones, select that, and then it'll bring in the file data and the additional, so in our instance, in this instance, the pose that we created, number 11, is brought in, and we can import that on its own, or with the whole lot of stuff that was created earlier. Make sure your apply scale is 0.01, deselect materials and meshes, and then just import. And that'll bring all the stuff in that you need to create your cooperative furniture item. Right, so on that note, we'll call it quits, and thanks everyone for watching. So thanks Miyaka for the brainstorming. I'm sure that it'll work. Just a question of figuring out how. Thanks for the sub, Silver. And thanks for the comment, Mr. Muppet. Your comment will be preserved for eternity, so long as Twitch is alive. And we shall see you on the next stream. So, on that note, cheerio everyone, and we shall, well, sign out. So bye for now everyone.